Trying to do a lightning round here to get quickly through as many of these questions and answers as we can. Apologies, Chairman, I think I might have just interrupted you. Sir, please.
My name is Reverend Conrad Tillard, and I'm with an organization called Black Clergy for Economic Empowerment. And I am enjoying this conversation. And I realize, as a pastor who served in Harlem, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Roxbury, and Flatbush, everywhere I've served, I've watched those communities gentrified. So I realize there's a plethora of issues. Renters, I've been in eviction court with folks. But what I'm concerned about right now is people like Lincoln. Because here in New York, and I'm most qualified to speak on the New York scene, we're losing people because our folks who own property are being driven out of this city. And they're being driven out, and this is the elephant in the room, by legislators, many of them who aren't even old enough to own property. We have a city councilman in New York, in Brooklyn, that it's been in the papers recently. He just got his first apartment. And yet these people are making housing policy, and they are painting owners of property with one broad brush, as though this is the Soviet Union, and a poor black person or a recently property acquiring family is the same as a land baron. As we speak right now, the governor has legislation called good cause eviction on her desk. And I've sat with Lincoln. He didn't say it, but he's had to take units of that 14-unit building he's had. He has to take units off the market because these same idealistic legislators are placing burdens on him that he can't keep up with. And so I'm saying to all of us, we need to talk to our elected officials. They need to be concerned about black wealth. We used to talk about black home ownership in the city. We only talk about affordable housing now. We've got black legislators like Kevin Parker, Stephanie Zinnerman, that these young radicals, leftist socialists, are picketing in front of their houses demanding that they support legislation that's going to drive black homeowners out of this city. So we've got to stand up. And this is about ownership, and black homeowners in the metropolitan area are in trouble. So good cause eviction is not what it seems to be. It will not help people in public housing. It does nothing to help people who can't pay their rent. But what it will help is someone that just graduated from Williams College that moves into Lincoln's building and makes his life a nightmare because they don't want a gas stove, they want an electric stove, and I'm sure a lot of other amenities that he can't necessarily afford to produce. So let's be very clear about what this conversation is. Could you speak to that? Thank you.
Yeah, a brief response to...
Welcome to the Gilchrist experience. This is especially heartfelt for me because, you know, God sends me things all the time. But this is something that we're all concerned with. And we have a revolutionary there, Reverend Conrad. I've been knowing Reverend Conrad for, what, 40 years, 30, 40 years? And he's a true revolutionary. And at a time like this, we need God on our side. And so, because this is the problem that we've been dealing with in Harlem and, well, New York City, or being black in America, housing. And of course, when it comes to housing, we're the last ones thought about. When we have today Sherry Culpepper, an old friend and an old family, and she's a homeowner. And I hesitant to play her piece, but welcome to the show. I want her to speak on it first.
Thank you.
And
Are you going to play it? I don't want to be redundant.
We'll play it later.
Okay.
But,
okay.
Give us a little comment on what you thought about the session that we saw.
Oh, the session was, I appreciated the comments by Lincoln, who is a member of Small Property Owners of New York, SPONY, and Reverend Conrad was right on it. In fact, some of the things that he said as I was waiting to speak and ask, I didn't pose a question, I had a statement, and he said, "Elephant in the room." I crossed out "elephant in the room." So he was right on point. Yeah, we have to be very careful of the narrative. You hear good cause eviction. Sounds good, sounds harmless. But I maintain that the SRO laws of the 30s are a prerequisite to and a mold for good cause eviction. You know, you wanted to help in the 30s, you wanted to help people migrating from South, coming back from World War II, and people needed a help, you know, a hand up. They needed some place to stay temporarily, 30 days, 40 days, until they got themselves settled. It was not designed for people to live in a room their entire lives. And we have now in a platform where that is being forced upon small homeowners. And now this good cause eviction is just going to, in my opinion, seal the proverbial, you know, nail in the coffin for small homeowners in New York City.
Before we go to Lincoln, I want Rev, you to explain this bill that's on the governor's desk, you said?
Yes, it is a deceptively named bill. The name of the bill is Good Cause Eviction. And this is something that many of the recent New York residents, people who have come from upstate, around the country, but they've come with a certain attitude. They've moved to places like Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant and act as though these were not vibrant communities before they got there. They have the Christopher Columbus syndrome. And one of the things that they've tried to force down the legislators' throat is this bill called Good Cause Eviction. Now, initially, the black legislators understood that while it sounds good, when they looked at the details, it will be disastrous to black homeowners. It essentially saddles black homeowners with a great deal of new legislation. Now, anyone that owns property in New York and has tenants, they know, and we are deeply concerned about our renters. Most of our folks rent, but we've worked hard and fought for protections for renters. And anyone will tell you that it is not easy to be evicted in New York City. In all of 2022, there were just about 800 evictions in the city of New York. But we also have to be concerned about our property owners, because if we don't own land, land is the basis of independence and freedom. And we used to talk in this city about creating home ownership opportunities. And many of our churches and our individuals and our community organizations have always historically prized home ownership. And good cause eviction will eviscerate black home ownership. Not only does it saddle people with a great deal of legislation, things that they will have to do to their apartments, but it also gives a tenant, the right to renew their lease in perpetuity. Now, I can assure you right now, any landlord that's owed money knows that it is not easy to go and simply say to a judge, I haven't been paid rent in 3 years. Can you please give me some relief? There are any number of orders to show cause and other things that a tenant can do to stay in that property till they get some money, or sometimes until they leave. And so good cause eviction adds more and more burden to people who own small properties, who own private homes. It also would affect people that rent out single-family homes in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and Queens. And so it's a bad bill. It's deceptive because it sounds like it helps people that can't pay their rent, but it actually doesn't do anything. If you're being evicted because you can't pay rent, it doesn't address that.
It will not help you. If you're being evicted from public housing, it does not deal with public housing. And so it's an ideal bill for someone who's litigious to come into a black or brown homeowner's home and make their lives miserable. And that's what people like Lincoln and others are facing. And it actually makes the housing crisis worse in New York, because what it does is it makes people who own small properties, after they've gone through all they've had to go through, they're simply taking units off of the market, which creates more of a lack and a dearth of home ownership. So we're saying to the governor, this bill is on the governor's desk right now. The left, the extreme, I call them the extreme left, the progressives are trying to push this down her throat, just like they've tried to do to Kevin Parker, Stephanie Zinnerman, and other legislators, Lori Cumbo. They've gone to their houses through threats and intimidation. And we're asking the black elected officials, stand up. Don't succumb to this. You know this bill does not protect black people. You know it doesn't protect people who can't pay their rent. But you're being pressured by the left, the AOCs, and the folks in the state legislature, and we're saying we cannot sell out black property owners so that we would become a people in this city that would largely be without ownership.
Amen.
Man,
All right, before we introduce Lincoln, I'm going to play this video of you at the conference. Play item 1, would you? And we'll be right back at you.
Access to secure, stable, safe housing that provides access to all of the critical amenities that help to ensure better health outcomes, give them access to educational opportunity, economic opportunity. A lot of our policies in the country are just designed to ensure that, okay, given your income, you can afford to pay a certain level of rent, but there are so many things that housing provides for you and is a facilitator for, beyond just a roof over your head. You know, to some of the points that have been raised, Lincoln, can you jump in for us, because the perspective of the independent landlord in this market is so critical.
Okay, again, I could just tell my personal story. I'm a New York landlord. My family's had property in New York since the early 60s, and our situation is that, like, we see the redlining program that has been replaced by rent stabilization, because they basically have done the same thing, as in it de-invests in our community and brings down the value of our properties. I've had an uncle that was the vanguard for the family. He came in to the U.S. again in the early 60s as a farmhand, and he made his way into New York, and he linked up with some Jewish members of the community and started acquiring property. And he led the way for our family, because his side of the family, they were farmers, but he was a very good businessman. He accumulated about 100 multi-unit properties. We're not talking about single-family homes. We come from Jamaica, and understand my father's side, we're builders, and we understand that wealth creation is multi-unit properties. And New York City, as the family is building up that wealth, the city and the state tacked on rent stabilization, which started crushing us. The earliest memory I have is in a property, 390 Eastern Parkway. My uncle and my father had possession of that building. And a few years ago, we saw, because we lost the property, and we saw a developer refinance that property for over $30-something million. We've had situations where there's a term warehousing that is thrown about property owners such as myself warehousing apartments. Well, redlining and rent stabilization forces us to warehouse our properties for large developers, for the big property owners, because we're cash businesses and we're forced to be in a subsistence situation. And again, the family had a pretty decent portfolio in Brooklyn. And I had an aunt have to sell a property in Brooklyn because we were getting out of New York, going to the other states decades ago. And this aunt, she sold a 20-unit building. And 3-4 years later, one of my generation looked back at the property, and we saw that the new owner sold one apartment in this 20-unit building for what my aunt sold the whole building for.
Gentrification, right? Now, we're talking about Eastern Parkway. Now, anybody knowing Eastern Parkway, that's the Park Avenue of Brooklyn. And as a result, some of these pre-war buildings have these huge apartments.
I
I
know
knew a
that
person
building.
on Eastern Parkway, the Lincoln House on 61 Lincoln, at
390.
Eastern Parkway, facing the Brooklyn Museum.
Three-
4-bedroom apartment.
The
I'm
building
sure
he mentioned,
You know the building that you mentioned?
I know the building. I can walk from my house to that building. It is a massive building, and at the it's just off of Bedford Avenue and Eastern Parkway on the southwest corner. At the southwest corner directly, there is a site where they were going to build a hotel. That construction stopped 3 years ago. And then to the right of it is 390. It's a massive building. That area is prime real estate. And having been a property owner and a landlord, I know what he's talking about. The city, quick story, I had 3 buildings that
Bring
my
in
uncle
the
and I,
Reverend on what we're talking about, the bill that's on the
Yes.
governor's desk.
the bill. Now, we had land tenants we had to take into court for non-payment of rent years ago. We owned 3 single-family homes in Brownsville. We had a friend who was a contractor. He renovated from the roof to the basement all 3 buildings, brand new. People move in. We had a woman who was not paying her rent. She worked for New York Telephone at the time. Her husband was retired. She owed us $16,000 in back rent. By the time you file to go to court, you have to wait 3 months before you can file a petition to take somebody to court for non-payment of rent. You file your paperwork, you wait for the date, you go in, and then they file paperwork to extend the case in court while they're still not paying the rent. Her attorney said, well, we're not sure they even own the property, all kinds of stupidness. At the end, she had to leave. She didn't pay back the $16,000. Plus, we had legal expenses to pay. The next tenant came in, a guy I knew, he needed a place for himself and his daughter. It's a house, it's not an apartment, 3-bedroom house, finished basement, everything. He doesn't pay his rent. He's $7,000 in arrears, all right? We have to pay real estate taxes. People think this is a joke. You own property, you're paying taxes on the property. You're paying a water bill, and you will lose your property for the water bill before you lose it for the taxes, all right?
For the water
Then
bill.
you have these purveyors looming around like buzzards. The matter of fact, the tax lien list, this is April, it should be out now. And it's published in the newspaper. So these buzzards throughout the counties,
How would this bill help you with that?
the thing
That's
is,
what we're talking about.
the landlord gets no break here. The tenant gets all the breaks. Granted, prices are high and they're unbelievably high for no reason. There's no reason. All these speculators and developers have come in here and run everything up through the roof. And let's go back, and you got to look at history. Charles Rangel invited Bill Clinton to Harlem. He said, come here. Prices in Harlem, Elambe Brath lost his place in Harlem that he had had for decades. His rent went to $5,000 the next month because now as white people coming in, gentrification means you black people get out. That's all that means. That's all it means. So Elambe Brath had to leave. I had another friend that had a stationery business on 125th Street. She had to go. Dorothy, Shields? Dorothy?
No, I can't remember. But we know.
Pittman Hughes, Dorothy Pittman Hughes.
Absolutely.
A woman
yes.
with a stellar history.
Yeah. Actually, and what made it so ironic, her business is now where Staples stands.
Precisely.
Yes.
She owned a stationery store and was driven out of her place because of this gentrification. I'm coming back.
Graham, there are all sorts of horror stories. I want to get to this bill that we're talking about.
It will not help is the answer to your question.
We want to talk about that.
It's
I want
not
to get
going to
back to
help
Reverend.
the property owners at all because the game is, this is a land grab. You have to look back in order to understand where you are today. Following Reconstruction, when they sold us out, all black people run off of their property in the 1880s and 90s. You're getting the same thing here. This is a land grab. They want the properties in the areas where we are for convenience. You're talking about subways, you're talking about buses. This is
we got to go to Lincoln and then come back to me.
Reverend Conrad.
We need 2 hours.
I'm trying to get you back in there. Well, we're all
you
got.
asked the question, and I just want to add to that.
How do we?
Not only will it not help the landlord, I think what we have to do is look at this thing holistically. So most people who rent apartments in New York, at least in our community, rent from individual owners. They rent from black property owners or people who have owned property. But if the owners have to take units off the market because they can't afford to update them to the extent the law demands, that good cause eviction demands, they're already facing tax increases. The water bills are going up, all kinds of expenses. So what they're doing is simply saying, Lincoln has 14 apartments. He's got 3 market rate apartments carrying a whole building. He has to take units off the market because the way the laws are written, he can't operate those units. Not only can he not operate them at a profit, he operates them at a loss.
What do you say, Lincoln? Tell us your story.
You heard a little bit of it. I
have the second half of that. I have the second half of that. A lot of us owners.
Say again?
I say I'll play the second half of it later. But I wanted to hear from you.
Okay.
You're actually going through this right now. And Sherry is too.
Yeah. Right. We're between a rock and a hard place. It's really, what I was trying to describe is that it's the continuation of a setup where we're forced to basically hold a property in place, function at a subsistence level, and really what happens is we are forced out, we have to give up, we sell pennies on a dollar, and a large owner comes in and is able to maximize on the property. That it's been happening for forever. And all of these laws, they're, as far as I can see, the motivation is to continue that same process. That's what good cause looks like it's aiming to do, to just stick a stake in our heart for this generation of minority owners, or lower income owners in general, and will be forced out of the market, and the gentrification process will just repeat itself all over again.
You know,
And you know, let me just add, this is not happening because our black property owners are bad business people.
Okay.
This is an artificially created problem created by legislators who are passing bad legislation. You know, what they don't want to admit, people like the Democratic Socialists of America, a lot of these people like Sia Weaver, a lot of these people have come to New York, they have families upstate, they have families in other states that own property. And in fact, many of them will be the beneficiaries of those properties. But they come to New York and they are not willing to tell the public what the truth is. And the truth is, they do not believe in private property. They want to make New York City a city where private property does not exist. This is a continuation of their socialist fantasy, socialist ideology and fantasy. And so what they're doing is, by taking over the legislature, by threatening local elected officials, they can't pass good cause in the legislature. They don't have the votes for it. So what they're trying to do right now is, in the budgeting process, bludgeon the governor and black lawmakers into supporting this and negotiating what they could never win in the legislature. Because essentially what they're saying is, people like Lincoln, Sherry, Graham, you are essentially greedy landlords. You don't need your property. Now, their parents can keep their properties upstate and out of state, but you have somehow committed a crime or doing something unethical simply because you're hardworking people that through delayed gratification, you or your relatives were able to acquire property and pass it on to you, which you hope to one day pass on to your descendants. So this is an insidious move on the part of folks that are playing with people's lives. Because lastly, on that point, if this passes, the big developers will simply say, I'm not doing business in New York. I'll go to another state. But people like Lincoln, Graham, Sherry, people in our community whose wealth is locked in their property, they are going to suffer the most. And that's why I'm raising my voice. This is not against renters. I am a renter right now in my life. I'm renting from an African-American homeowner. I have to pay my rent so he can pay his mortgage. And I'm happy that he was able to provide me a decent place to live for my family. And I'm sure I'm helping him to pay his mortgage. That's a symbiotic relationship. And we cannot let people come in our community and make us look at homeowners as bad people, when in fact they are hardworking people that we should be emulating and not tearing down.
So what's the answer? How do we solve the problem? Unity?
Stop good cause eviction first.
Okay.
That's the first thing we have to do.
Well, how do we do that?
We got to call Carl Hastie. We got to call Andrea Stewart Cousins. We've got to, reach out to your state senator, Cordell Clare.
Oh, Cornell.
We got to reach out to the governor's office. If you own a property, or if you one day hope to own a property, if you believe in private property, if you believe in the free market, you've got to lift up your voice, because what they are proposing will change dramatically the real estate relationship in this city forever. I mean, let me just add one more thing. You know, one of the things that good cause would do would make it impossible for a landlord to get a troubling, a problem-causing tenant out of their property. Now, you know, these same folks, interestingly enough, are making it very difficult for landlords to run background checks. They're making it very, very difficult for landlords to have control of their property because they don't believe in private property. Now, you can't move into NYCHA if you have certain criminal histories.
That's right.
But they want people to bring folks into their homes, and not only would they essentially have no way of knowing who these people are, But if they're a troubled tenant, it would essentially be impossible to get them out because good cause gives the tenant a right to renew their lease in perpetuity. And I mean, all of us, whether you're a tenant or you're a homeowner, we believe in fairness. You know, we don't want any homeowner to be in a position where they have all the responsibilities for a property, but essentially no control over their own property. That's just not fair, and that will collapse the real estate market.
Mm.
Yes, it will.
Thank you. Well, we've got quite a ways here. Well, I want to introduce Sherry Culpepper. She's got to have her statement, and I want to play the video 4. This is Sherry at the
number 4.
conference. Number 4.
Number 4,
Who's
my
up
daughter's
first?
favorite number.
Same page, like Earth, Wind, and Fire said, our voices will ring as one. All right,
Thank you, sir.
I was going to say, on that note, Maurice White would want me to take the mic. My name is Sherry Culpepper. I am going to keep it quick as I can. I am 4th generation Harlemite. I've lived in Chicago. I've lived in Boston, went to Northeast University. I've seen Roxbury, all the communities look just like Harlem. What happened? I grew up, I went away to college, I came back, I had these dreams of helping my family keep our 9 properties that we had systematically. The politicians, I'm a member of SPONY, systematically the politicians have stolen our properties. It is the proverbial elephant in the room everywhere. Let us call it what it is. Let me say this. New York City is, in my opinion, has had disdain for black owners since they took Seneca Village and made it Central Park. Has had disdain for black ownership since they demolished Madam C.J. Walker's home, a double building in Harlem that was built with the finest materials and just demolished after just a few years. And then the Landmark Society said, had the city not demolished her building, it would be a landmark. I am currently in Supreme Court against all the city agencies. My property was deemed, my one family, Brownstone, was deemed an SRO in the 1930s, only occupied by family members. I have 9 people living absolutely free for 10 years. I used to work in radio. 10 years ago, I had to become an operating engineer to take care of these people and to fight HPD, Housing Preservation Development. Housing Preservation Development not only systematically takes care of these people, but they deemed me a slumlord. And no one's ever paid rent. So this goes on. I always say New York City is like a petri dish to see what we can get away with in other areas of this country. And if we get away with it here, it proliferates around the United States. So let's get down to the real problem here. It's economics. It's racial injustice that is perpetuated. And I wish all of you were at the conference right before this one, where the gentleman is talking about the metaverse. We are behind the 8 ball as a people. We are not, in 5 years, we are going to be just names of streets and names of buildings and a thing of the past, just like our brothers and sisters, the Native Americans. So let us do something now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please.
Well, we've heard all the problems. Conrad has given us a solution to fight this bill. But meanwhile, if it does pass, well, where are we? Sherry, how do you see a solution to your problem?
Ironically, my problem is a little different in that I'm not a landlord. A landlord implies you have a landlord-tenant relationship. There's a lease in place. That is not.
Okay.
I'm a homeowner that, because of single-room occupancy laws of the 1930s and the way they were implemented and now still being enforced, and those areas are the footprint of what was prior communities that were redlined. So essentially they changed the definition of redlining and they kind of diluted it, but they're still enforcing these 1930s antiquated laws and statutes. They're still being enforced. So that is how my situation. But as I mentioned, I'm an operating engineer. I would never have been operating heavy equipment under 14 tons had it not been for this situation. So God always
Tell us what an
sends
operating engineer is.
an operating engineer.
That's a key person on the person you don't want to mess with and irritate on a construction site is the operating engineer. Because if you got to get your stuff to the 5th floor,
This is true.
she'll hem you up and you'll be waiting to get your stuff to the, because you're not going to carry it to the 5th floor.
And it's
So-
the toughest union in the world.
It
to
it
become a
is.
part of.
I love my brothers and sisters that I've met. I would never have had the occasion to commingle with them had it not been for this journey that I'm on. But we basically operate and maintain heavy equipment under 14 tons. So that includes cherry pickers, payloaders, bobcats, backhoes, and I did a 4-year apprenticeship. The oldest black female ever, the oldest
Female.
oldest apprentice ever to go through the program.
All
I did
right.
4 years. I had to be tested out on all the machines. I passed all of them, and it's still a journey. You know, I'm 9 years now. That's 4 years apprenticeship. I've been 5 years in the union.
And you did all this to support the people in your building.
Actually, I did it initially to hire a good attorney. It was an oxymoron in New York City. I paid 31 attorneys. 31, do you hear me? After the 5th one, I actually applied to law school. But I couldn't figure out how to pay for law school and pay all the fines and the bills they were giving me while I was at work. You had people deliberately putting holes in the walls and just a bunch of stuff. And again, I'm in
Yes.
court, so some of this I can't go into a lot of details. But when I say there's good cause eviction, I'm seeing too many parallels between the good cause eviction and the SRO laws of the 30s and how they are now currently being enforced. And I'm saying, I've been telling SPONY, small property owners, beware, because these same agencies that you're going to are the same agencies that are sanctioning and doing what they're doing with this SRO enforcement, which essentially you're trying to steal my property. And these are not, now as Reverend Conrad said, we're not demonizing people. There's a problem, but I don't think the problem is making poor people or low-income people comfortable. Let's deal with economics. I don't want to hear about affordable housing. Affordable housing in Manhattan is much different than affordable housing in Harlem. You're talking a mean income. Average mean income in
Right,
Manhattan
right,
is much different than the average mean income in Harlem.
Definitely.
So let's really address what the real problem is. Stop making poor people comfortable. Let us address why we are in this economic condition, and let's rise up and do something
How do
about
we
that.
fight
And not only that, but you know, let's face it, the profit margin for people like Lincoln and many people like him who own small properties and operate them is not a huge. I mean, he's working to make a living. He's not getting rich. I mean, he's working in the boiler room. He's fixing toilets. I mean, he is truly a small property owner. You know, when I listen to our sister's story, that's we've always been able to take lemons and make lemonade. That's a great achievement that you were able to do that. But you should not have had to do that to maintain your property, and that is uh, just one more of the horror stories that I have heard about small property owners in our community fighting to hold on to their properties. You know, you said that you're not a landlord now, but here's the problem. You might decide you want to move to Florida and you want to rent out your place or some other units that you're able to. And no bureaucrat, no elected official should take a position in a capitalist free market society that because of their ideology, they want to make owning property essentially unaffordable. Because as Lincoln already said, the big boys will be unhurt by this. They will decide to put their money elsewhere until the political winds change. But the reason why I'm here, and the reason why, and you asked earlier, Brother Gilchrist, what we can do. We've got to help Black people to understand what good cause is, how insidious it is. And I'm so happy that many of the clergy, who, when they initially heard about good cause, they, like many of us, were duped and thought it was a good thing. But as people like the Reverend Dr. Johnny Green find out about this, he has now become a strong spokesman against good cause eviction. People like David Randolph Holder, great minister in New Rochelle, because this is a statewide law. They are rising up. People like our esteemed leader in Harlem, Reverend Dr. Carl Washington. As these ministers in our community, Adolphus Lacey, Dr. Adolphus Lacey at Bethany Baptist Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Reverend Alfred Cockfield over in Canarsie. I mean, as the ministers around the city, John Williams, Seventh-day Adventist minister from that section of Brooklyn over there, where many of our immigrant brothers and sisters from the Caribbean have purchased properties, and we have to protect them. And so I'm happy to see how the ministers have stood up. Nigel Pierce there at Grace Congregational in Harlem, Dr. Valerie Dura from Bed-Stuy. I mean, all over the city, people are waking up. And so we've got to let more folks know. That's why I was so happy to be on your show today, because if you are a Black or brown or Asian or white small property owner, I hope you will join this coalition. I hope that you will hear my voice, because what they are pushing, and again, they don't have the votes in the legislature. So this is not going to pass the legislature in the traditional way that a bill would pass. This is a pressure tactic that they right now are trying to pressure the governor of the state of New York to do their bidding, which will ultimately give them the ability to say at their Democratic Socialist meetings, we defeated the free market again. And that's ultimately what they're doing. You know, Graham Witherspoon, I was a student leader. A lot of people don't realize this. I was a student activist. I met people like AOC. I met people like Brisport. I met people like Sia Weaver 38 years ago. And typically what they do is the same as the radicals in the 60s, those that came out of schools like Berkeley and Williams College and UCLA. They led poor Black brothers into crimes and doing things that would ultimately get them sentenced to 40 and 50 years in prison, but they got haircuts. And in the 80s joined the Reagan Revolution.
That's right.
And what I'm saying is that many of these people running around Harlem and Bedford-Stuyvesant talking about the masses and the poor, in 10 years they will have moved on back to their homes and inherited property, and they will have misled us. And at that point, New York City will become like Washington, D.C. When I grew up in Washington, D.C., the city was 80% Black. It was known as Chocolate City.
Chocolate City.
If you want to see the end of the line of gentrification, just go to Washington, D.C. today. And that's what's they have in mind, that's what they have in mind for Harlem, for Bedford-Stuyvesant,
Bed-Stuy, Crown
for
Heights.
areas of the Bronx. And so we've just got to stand up, spread the word. We can stop this. When we fight, we win. When we lift up our voices with clarity and people understand what the issues are, we will win.
You know, there's
Well, I want to show Lincoln's next video because he has a lot of important things to say. Run item 3, would you? And Lincoln, we'll get back to you. And I want you to hear yourself.
Most of the regulations here over impact minority owners, blacks in particular. I'm a member of SPONY. We're a multi-ethnic organization, every stripe, and we're all now caught up in this. But from what I see, all of this is a continuation of the redlining program, and the squeeze is constantly on. 2019, they put in legislation called HSTPA that basically tanked my economic viability, because I was one of those owners that was giving those discounts to my tenants, really caretaking for them and their economic opportunity. Because I was basically drafted into the property, because I was one of the generation who was like, nah, I don't really want to get into this real estate thing because it's nuts. But the situation was that this particular property that I'm dealing with now, my father had it, transferred it to my mother, and my mother ended up struggling with it. My sister came in, and they were getting threatened by people that were in the property, people that took over, drug dealers, we're talking about, that took over units in the property. And I got drafted, is basically what it was. I had to come in, and I'm not Superman, but literally I've had confrontation with weapons in the hallway, fights in front of the building, in the basement, this, that, and the other, having people get arrested, this, that, and the other, to clean up the property. And I bent over backwards to fix up units. 9/11, I'm in the basement here. I was working on the Lehman Brothers, and right after 9/11, we ended up here. I had to take my savings from that employment and throw it in the property, because my mother was a New York City school teacher, and she had an entire 14-unit building filled with tenants. Almost no one was paying rent. She had 3 tenants paying rent. And guess what? Right now, I have 3 tenants in a 14-unit building that are consistently paying rent right now. Everybody else is either moving out or struggling, and I'm trying to work with them. I will continue. The bottom line, to reiterate, is that the legislation, it sounds like it's good for tenants, but it's really a setup, because affordable housing is not really affordable. It's not affordable for me. It's destroyed my economic viability, and it makes it extremely difficult for me to provide quality housing to my tenants, because the rents are simply too low to cover the cost of operating the property. My numbers, I need about $1,100 per unit to get by. I have multiple apartments that are $930, $950 a month. So I'm losing on those. I have one that's $480. That's one of those quote-unquote warehouse units that, because of HSTPA, I can't do anything with. I want to, but the numbers just simply don't add up. And it's crushing me, and it's degrading the quality of housing for my tenants.
Joanna, go ahead.
So I just want to make a quick point. I think one thing.
You're one of the fair guys out there, trying to do the right thing, and look what it does to you. So we've heard we've heard what the owners are doing and the sorts of problems that they're having. Now we have Graham here. He's a real estate broker, Now, Graham would handle this all a little differently because he carries a gun.
I have.
And he's told his solution to the problem.
What I did most people wouldn't do, I broke the law. I tell you that straight out.
Okay.
A man owed me $6,000. The preceding tenant walked with owing us 16. The next guy owed 6 or 7. I locked him out. I said, this is not play money. You're trying to keep the building afloat, and some people don't care. The money for his rent was to pay the contractor who renovated the entire house. This is not an apartment, it was a house. 3-bedroom house with a basement. I locked him out. And he calls me, I can't get in. I said, what's the problem? Well, there were 2 big locks on the door. Well, locks are put on doors to keep people out. He said, well, this is illegal. I said, what's illegal is not paying your rent. That's illegal. I said, because we have real estate taxes to pay, water taxes to pay, I have a contractor to pay, and you needed a place for yourself and your daughter, and you haven't paid rent in over 4 months. I said, this is not a game. I said, so if it's illegal, you call the police, and if you think NYPD is going to get you back in that building, you're wrong. I don't care about NYPD. You're playing, I'm not going to lose this house, and we have 3 houses on that block. I said, we're not losing these houses because you don't want to pay your rent, because a mechanic's lien will enable the contractor to seize the property. All right? And this is what people don't think about. They don't see the money that is involved in providing them with a simple apartment or a house. So I told him, you have till Friday, your stuff is going in storage. And I put that stuff in storage. I paid for 1 month. And he never showed up. Now, I took a chance. I knew it was illegal. But I'll go street on you if I have to. I can do street corner justice. I'll do that. But I'm not telling people to do what I did, but that's what I did. And the thing is, people, we've had tenants as realtors come in for Section 8. Some were good. And some of us, we've never gotten the money that was due us.
Yeah.
All right? So it's a give and take. Lastly, and I'm going to stop with this, another thing is the way the taxes are being done in this city. These big developers are coming in. I got an email here from a developer looking for properties. They have like $100 million to spend. They put up a building in your block. You might have a 1 or 2 family. They put up a 6-unit or a 10-unit building. They got a J51 tax abatement. They're not paying taxes for 10 years, but you better pay your taxes.
Right.
All right? And because they put this building into your block now, your taxes have gone up. I have a brother on 126th Street.
Right.
He's now approaching 70 years of age. He wanted to retire at 65. Irsa and I went to a hearing with the Department of Finance because his taxes were up to $20,000 a year. His taxes were almost as high as the new building that went up down the street. He couldn't retire. He said, I can't charge my tenant. I can't raise his rent. It wouldn't be fair to him. He says, but I can't retire. I have to keep working to pay the taxes on the building. This is another game they're playing. They're outpacing us with regard to income coming in and what they're sucking out of you. All right? Redlining, and again, history. Redlining was a federal government program. It wasn't the banks.
Right.
It was the federal government that put that program into place to cut the throats and cut the Achilles heels of black people. So you cannot make the money. You cannot pass what you work for onto your children and grandchildren. This is part of the systemic racism that we're dealing with. I don't need to sit at a diner and have a cup of coffee with a white man. I need to understand how racism is involved in every aspect of our lives and in government and everything that we do.
And Graham, that's exactly what's going on today. It's lawmakers, it's policymakers that will stand and look at you in your face and say that they're fighting for the masses. And yet they're doing nothing more but using very high-sounding rhetoric to mask that, in fact, their policies. I'm saying to the legislators, I'm saying to Senator Cordell Clare in Harlem, I'm saying to Al Taylor, I'm saying to legislators throughout Brooklyn, this policy is going to remove black property ownership in New York. It is a bad policy. Yes, we have problems in this city. Our renters need protection. I've always worked for that and will continue to. The rent is too high. You know, we've got to create these same people. Shows you how ideological they are, and how sometimes people that are so didactic and driven by ideology, their moves don't make sense. These same people that are creating all of these burdens on property owners, especially small property owners like Lincoln and Graham, Sherry, and others, these are the same people saying we don't want developers building more units. And so while their policies are causing units to come off the market, they're also saying to developers, you can't partner with community groups like Johnny Ray Youngblood was able to do out in East New York and build thousands of units, of thousands of home ownership opportunities. That's what we need right now. And as the government's policies in the 30s with redlining and the laws governing SROs hurt us, good cause eviction and the ideologues in the legislature today are hurting black people in this city. And so I don't believe in class warfare. You know, most black people I know that are renters aspire to be property owners. Let's support our property owners. Let's have laws that are fair. After all, if you don't have a 800 credit score, I'm talking to the renters now, you can't go down to one of these large apartment buildings, fill out an application, and have to have 40 times the rent in terms of income. But you can go to Lincoln and say, I have a good job, I've had some issues, I will pay my rent. You can go to small property owners. They will work with you. In fact, that's where most of our folks find homes. It's with small property owners. Let's not hurt them. Please, I'm really appealing to our legislators. Let's not hurt the only people. And you know, this will also affect our churches. I'm talking to Abyssinian. I'm talking to other churches throughout Harlem and Brooklyn that own units, that rent apartments. All of these units will fall under good cause eviction if this legislation is passed.
The rapture.
We've gone over time.
Part 2 next week.
I have, there's going to be a part 2 on this. And the God in me loves the God in you. Thank you for all that came. And
God bless.
We're going to do this again.
Don't go, comrade.
All right. God bless you.
Lincoln, you
Thank
still
you.
there?
Yeah, I'm here.